Hi there, this is Kelly Mogilewski. Sorry about having to switch screens on you there. This is our first screencast for English methods, and I'm doing this on how to write instructional objectives. This is something that you may have a good handle on, something that you may also want a little bit of extra talking through. So I have this PowerPoint here. I won't always use PowerPoints for the screencast, but I thought this would be a good start for this first one. So here we go. What are objectives? An objective is something that you're asked to write for your lessons. It's something that the PACT requires and the ESA requires. This is a description of the performance you want learners to be able to show you. Essentially, it tries to articulate what do you want students to know and what do you want students to be able to do. Now, we think of this and we think of our standards and wonder what's the difference between the standards and objectives. Don't the standards also articulate the skills that we want students to learn? And they do, but they're a little bit broader than that. They do say what students should know and what they should do. Often a standard is very broad, covers a large time frame. It may cover many lessons over the course of a year. And a standard doesn't really explain the conditions under which a student's going to perform that standard, how good it has to be considered adequate performance of the standard, what it's really going to look like. And so the objective is specific to your lesson and to your specific teaching and articulates in an accessible and measurable way. What is it that students are going to be able to do? What are they going to be able to produce that you could see, that you could measure, that will show you that they have achieved the objective and then more broadly speaking the standard that you're trying to teach. So two good rules for creating objectives. The first is to explain your objective well and try not to be too broad about it. And so we tend to hear the words in standards and in some objectives, I want students to know. I want students to understand. I want students to appreciate. If we're getting really stuck, we might say, I want students to really understand. That's not quite giving us something very specific that we can point to, unless we can jump inside the student's brains, to really know what it means for the student to achieve the objective. So if you say something more like, I want students to write, I want students to compare, you're getting much closer to a real observable skill that students could show you that would let you know that they've achieved the standard. So helpful in creating objectives are terms from Bloom's taxonomy. If you aren't familiar with Bloom's taxonomy, you'll have this PowerPoint for download. That's a hyperlink that you can click on or just Google it. Bloom's taxonomy, it's all over the place. A way to organize the kind of thinking that we ask students to do. And so the terms here, this might be a good place to pause the screencast and look at some of these terms, are at different levels of comprehension and understanding, but these are good terms to pull from when you're writing objectives. Better to say than know and understand things like identify, compare, criticize, organize, evaluate. Terms like this are very useful for objectives. So second rule, and these rules come from another source, and I will give you the source of that. It's inside the PowerPoint, are characteristics of the standards. So performance, an objective states what a learner is expected to be able to do. Conditions, what are the conditions under which a student is able to perform the task? In ELA, what this often looks like is, can they do it orally? Can they do it in writing? Can they do it in some other format? And finally, the criterion, how well do they have to do it in order for it to count as being acceptable? Another approach to looking at writing objectives is ABCD, audience, basically the student. Behavior, what is the student going to do? Condition, the conditions under which the performance is to occur, and degree, as we've said, what is acceptable performance. So let's take our example from class when we were talking about the story of an hour. Sorry, I hope you got a chance to read it. It's a really good story. But we looked at Reading Literature 3, analyze how complex characters develop over the course of a text. So how can we develop an objective to go along with the teaching of this standard? Let's try that ABCD model. Our audience. The student will be able to, you'll often see this written as TWISBAT, TSUBAT, TSWBAT. Behavior. What are students going to do? They're going to, and I had to make this up, I had to make a choice. Identify two quotations which show a character changing over the course of a story and explain how these quotations demonstrate a change in that character. Conditions. Okay, so this is where we get stuck in English class, and this is what we talked about in class on Monday. The conditions are detailed in the objective, determine how the skill will be assessed, and this is where we tend to tangle our reading and our writing instruction. So when we are focusing on a reading standard, it serves our students well to determine whether the objective is best demonstrated in writing, is necessarily demonstrated in writing, or able to be assessed in any other format. We will be able to differentiate our instruction better. We will be able to better serve our students in their learning of reading, let's say, if we don't tangle our writing assessments and our writing standards into our assessment of the reading objectives. Sometimes, yes, it will be in writing, but just to help kind of tease those two things out a little bit. Okay, so that aside, let's continue. Our objective is now reading. The student will be able to identify two quotations which show a character changing over the course of the story and explain how these quotations demonstrate a change in the character. Now let's add the conditions. In a paragraph or in a presentation. So I've decided that in this case the writing of it in a paragraph form is not the key that I'm after. I'm after for knowing that they can analyze character development over time. And finally, the degree. What counts? So I'm going to say that what counts for this objective is that they make one statement per quotation which adequately describes the character at that moment, and then one statement which explains the change over time. Very, very specific. So now our objective reads. Notice our standard reads. Analyze how complex characters develop over the course of the text, and our objective reads. The student will be able to identify two quotations which show a character changing over the course of the story and explain how these quotations demonstrate a change in the character in a paragraph or in a presentation with at least one statement per quotation which accurately describes the character at each moment and one statement which logically explains the change over time. That is super complicated, but that is super clear as an objective for learning in a specific lesson. And you can see now how great this is when it comes down to trying to build an assessment, because now I know exactly what I'm looking for. I'm looking for two quotations about the character. I'm looking for two statements explaining those quotations. And I'm looking for a statement that brings all of those things together. This is going to be in a paragraph or it's going to be in a presentation. I'm going to leave that up to the student's choice or point and tell students what they're going to do. I now have a very clear assessment that I can share with my students and that I can use to assess their achievement of the standard and of the lesson. So you will see this in your mini unit. I'm asking you to write objectives. You'll see this in that ESA assignment. Those of you doing the PACT, this is incredibly important for the PACT. You will be asked to write objectives. Good practice writing objectives makes this kind of thinking permanent. No, you won't write these down for the next 20 years of your teaching career, but if you think of standards this way and you think of objectives this way, then you can start thinking of assessments this way, and your teaching, your instruction, and your ability to know whether your students have achieved the goals for the class becomes much more clear for everybody. I hope that's really helpful as a screencast. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to follow up. I will put this PowerPoint on Blackboard for you to find on your own. Okay?